Welcome to the Monterey Peace and Justice Center, everyone. I'm Catherine Crockett. I'm the board president, and I want to recognize other members of the board: Sylvia Shee, Sidney Ramsden Scott, McGregor Eddy, Judy Karras, Susan Devonna Conrad. She's not here today, but we're a working board, and
Lynn Hamilton.
Oh, Lynn Hamilton. Yes. Thank you. Okay, our purpose is to inspire and mobilize the people of Monterey County, cultivate peace, nonviolence, democracy, and environmental sustainability here and around the world. The Peace Center provides resources and serves as a home base to grassroots organizations working for peace and justice. It exists and is maintained by individual donors, so if you wish to leave a gift to help us out, there's a big jar on the table by the door. I also want to recognize our co-sponsors, Veterans for Peace, Chapter 46. Michael Dempsey is our president, he's here in the back. Monterey Branch of Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, Beverly Bean is the president, she's also here today. And the Peace Coalition of Monterey County, chaired by Jill Warkin and Sidney Ramsden Scott, who's also on our board. So thank you for co-sponsoring this event. Today's event is being videotaped by Wes White. He's a videographer and social justice activist. It will be shared after the event on the weekly peace calendar. If you're not receiving the weekly peace calendar, you can receive it by mail. There are sign-up sheets on the table, with yellow tablecloth. And here you'll find events happening here and around the county. You can also find it on our website, peacecentral.org. Dr. Sharat Lynn writes and lectures on global political economy, the Middle East, and public health. He's been to Gaza, the West Bank, and Israel several times, and has been an eyewitness to some of the great upheavals of the Arab world. He's affiliated with Human Agenda, San Jose Peace and Justice Center, he's former president, and Initiative for Equality. His activism and civic engagement have led him all over the world over the fight for social justice. We welcome Dr. Lynn's return to the Peace and Justice Center and look forward to hearing his insights on the state of affairs in Gaza, as well as the greater role in the world in Israeli-Palestinian affairs. And there will be a Q&A talk afterwards. So, Dr. Lynn.
Thank you very much, Catherine, for that warm introduction. And thank you all for being here. Thanks for all the organizations that keep this place alive and make this event possible. And it's an honor for me to come back. It's a great pleasure to be here, but it's also a great sadness, a great deal of anxiety. You know, that I come here to discuss the events that are happening, that have been happening now for nearly 4 months in Gaza and in Palestine. So the reason, of course, that this conflict, this is another one of those conflicts that's 7,000 to 8,000 miles away, and why this one is particularly close to home, is because even though U.S. troops are not directly involved in ground combat, you know, this is a conflict that the United States of America, through our tax dollars, has enabled and has you know, in a sense, created. And I'll explain how it helped to create it, just because of the sort of unconditional support that the U.S. government has given to the Zionist project, which is a settler colonial project, you know, ever since 1948 and even before that. Okay, so we'll go into a little bit of the history. So the format of this talk is I'll go into a little bit of the history of the conflict and Gaza in particular, and then I will address a number of the key issues and also some of the recent events. Like the issues of international law and how this is playing out in the international courts. Now, before I begin, I just wanted to point out that you probably have all seen the flyer that announced this event, and it was a picture. It was a picture of Gaza back. Actually, this photograph was taken towards the end of the 19th century, and it is of what is known as the Great Omari Mosque. Now, the Great Omari Mosque was built in the 7th century. So this is in the very early years after the foundation of Islam. The Great Omari Mosque is the second oldest mosque in Palestine, and in terms of its importance to Islam, it's second only in importance within Palestine to the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, in the old city. And Israel bombed it. So today this is what it looks like. It's just a pile of ruins. The minaret is still partially standing, but it's heavily damaged, and the rest of the mosque has been almost obliterated. So this is, an historical, a cultural landmark, something that it's like, it could, the only thing worse would be to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque or the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem, or the Church of the Holy Sepulchre where Jesus is said to have been born. I mean, it's tantamount to that kind of destruction of heritage that is happening. And of course, the destruction of structures, sort of pales into relative importance to the loss of human life and the kind of suffering that people in Gaza are suffering through. And some of it is for me, it's unimaginable that more than 1,000, maybe 1,200 children in Gaza have had limbs amputated, and most of these have been without anesthesia, because Israel controls everything that goes in and out of Gaza. Israel is deliberately restricting the movement of medicine. Remember, medicine is not in bulk. If you want to bring flour in, you have to have big trucks. You have to load them, fill them with bags of flour. It takes many trucks. If you bring one of those trucks, one of those big lorries in with medicines, you could have enough medicine there for a few weeks, easily, for 2 million people. But even the flow of medicine is being restricted. And there are trucks that are lined up on the Egyptian side of the Rafah border. And if you approach today, I just saw some images of it last night, how trucks are just lined up, maybe 100 trucks are lined up behind the Egyptian side of the Rafah border, waiting to get in. And the inspection process that Israel imposes, even though that border crossing is between Egypt and Gaza, Israel controls it. I mean, Egypt also controls it. The Palestinian government in Gaza also controls it. But Israel is the choking point. And then, of course, Israel has, about a month ago, opened the Kerem Shalom crossing between Israel and Egypt. But even though that crossing has capacity, they have multiple lanes, you have truck inspection stations, the infrastructure is there to move things much faster, but it is deliberately restricting that flow. And it's a multi-step process. You get one inspection, you have to wait for another inspection and another inspection before the truck can go through. So this is very, very frustrating for UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, which is the agency of the United Nations that has been providing humanitarian relief for Palestinian refugees ever since the first Nakba in 1948. And UNRWA is the only agency that has the capacity to provide all of the humanitarian assistance, the medicines, the fuel, the clean drinking water, to provide the services inside Gaza for 2.3 million people. But it also provides these similar services to Palestinian refugees in 3 other countries, right? In Jordan, in Syria, and in Lebanon. And it's a huge agency, right? It's in Gaza, UNRWA has 13,000 employees. It normally brings 500 large trucks into Gaza every day. Today, as we speak, still only about 100 trucks are getting in per day. So 1/5 of what is normally needed. UNRWA as an agency has 33,000 employees in the four countries. That is to say, in Gaza and the West Bank, being Palestine, and then also Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon. So, you know, there's no sort of private agency that can replace UNRWA in terms of providing what Palestinian refugees need to survive. Okay, so that's a bit of the framing. I wanted to go through a little bit of the history. And Israel talks about the Hamas attack on October 7th as if that's the beginning of this crisis. And of course, the Hamas attack on October 7th, as horrible as it was, in terms of killing civilians, in terms of destruction, in terms of horror, it is a response. We have to remember that it is a response to what Israel has been doing for all these years. And most importantly, what it has been doing most recently, as the governments in Jerusalem have become more and more right-wing. So the Israeli government that was formed in November of 2022. This is the latest government of Benjamin Netanyahu, which brought into the coalition a number of very right-wing parties. And to understand how right-wing it is, now we often say that, well, this latest government is so right-wing that it provides full-scale support to the settlers in the West Bank, to the point where they're not only encouraging the settlers to go out and attack Palestinians, but the government is giving them free arms and the number of these arms is also accelerating. It's like 1,000 per week, rifles, automatic rifles, to go out and terrorize Palestinians. They're using these arms. The Israeli army may be there watching what's happening, and they will do nothing because they are there to support the settlers. Okay, and so this is really, in terms of the magnitude of the government support for the settlers, it's unprecedented. But it's more than that. So some of the ministers in this government, so most notably the names that you hear about, are Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir. And these two ministers actually live in settlements in the West Bank. Okay? They actually live in settlements. And of course those settlements are a very short distance to the Knesset and to the halls of government in Jerusalem. And so that's how much it is a settler government. that is just the last phase. It's the last phase, and in that last phase, from the November 2022 government, its formation, the number of Palestinians who have been killed in the West Bank has escalated. So before October 7th, there were 160 Palestinians, roughly speaking, who were killed by either the IDF or by settlers in the West Bank. So that means from January 1st till October 6th of 2023. Okay, 160. And then after that, in the 4 months after October 7th, somewhere between, well, maybe 360 to 400 Palestinians have been killed by the IDF and by settlers in the West Bank. Right? The number of Palestinians who have been arrested by the IDF, because in the occupied territories there are no Israeli police. It's under military control. So Israel enforces its will through the IDF in the occupied territories. And it has arrested before October 7th, from January 1st to October 6th, it has arrested maybe 3,000, something on that order, 3,000 Palestinians. And some of them get released, some of them get rearrested, and every time they're rearrested, it counts as an arrest. After October 7th, the number of Palestinians who have been arrested in the West Bank has gone to about 6,000. 6,000. Most of these are under administrative detention. Administrative detention means they don't have to, the Israeli authorities do not have to file any charges. And they can be held for 6 months, but then the administrative detention can be renewed. Okay, and it can be renewed indefinitely. And so the Israeli government doesn't have to prove anything. And most of these cases are, there have been journalists who have been reporting on this, and most of these cases are just Palestinians who have been expressing their resistance to the Israelis. And it can be just engaging in protest, it can be social media posts, it can be, any little thing like that. And so there's no need for them to prove that any of these people have connections, and most of them don't have connections to any kind of Palestinian militias. So this is what's happening. This has been what was happening, in the immediate period before October 7th. And this is in contrast to what was happening before this right-wing government came into power. So before November 2022, the number of Palestinians killed, the number of Palestinians arrested was substantially lower. It's maybe about half of what it has been in 2023, before October 7th. So this is the escalation that we have to understand, and what was the context. The other context is the new government being much more restrictive about Palestinians, I'm talking about Muslims, going onto the Temple Mount to pray in the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So they have these age restrictions. So anyone who is young would be barred from entering the Temple Mount, and only the very old and the women would be allowed to go there and pray. So these restrictions have been, infuriating people, and also infuriating people in Gaza. And so the Hamas action is both an action in response to the situation of Gaza being the world's largest open-air prison, in the sense that nothing can go in and out, no people can go in and out, without Israeli permission, and it's very, very hard to get that permission. There were several times when I sought to enter Gaza and I was turned back at the Rafah crossing or at, you know, another checkpoint. And this was not the case before. I mean, in earlier years, in the early 2000s, and of course the first time I went to Gaza was in 1972, and you know, it was, of course, in that time we could travel relatively freely. We could take one bus, and you don't have to change buses. It just goes right through into Gaza. So things have really progressively over the years gotten much worse for the people in Gaza. And so this is the context that we cannot forget. And the comparison that I will make is to the Warsaw Ghetto. The Warsaw Ghetto was of course a walled off compound where Jews were concentrated by the Nazis in preparation for sending them to the execution camps. And Marek Edelman was a commander, died some years ago, was living in the U.S., was a commander of the Jewish resistance in the Warsaw Ghetto. And he smuggled arms. There were tunnels, so the Jewish resistance had built these tunnels under the walls of the Warsaw Ghetto. And they used those tunnels to smuggle arms in to enable them to do this uprising. Now the uprising was targeted against the Nazis, of course, but in the process of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, 13,000 Jews also died. Okay, so this was an act that most of us today would regard as resistance to a terrible oppression, to a genocide that was happening. And so, what about Gaza? Isn't Gaza, hasn't it been going through this sort of process? Maybe it's a slower genocide, but we'll get into the genocide a little bit later. Okay, so enough said about that. Let me go into a little bit of the history, and I'll do it fairly quickly. So this whole situation does not go back centuries, and it does not go back millennia. This is not a conflict that is thousands and thousands of years old. Jews and Palestinians, Muslims, Christians, Druze, Bedouins have lived together in the land that is Palestine and in the surrounding countries for centuries. Okay, and even as late as the period of the Ottoman Empire, things were relatively cordial, in the sense that these people lived together, they traded, they were neighbors, and everything was fine. And you know, there's plenty of documentation of how Palestinians, being the non-Jewish residents of Palestine, lived side by side, traded, and had, you know, friendly relations with their neighbors who were the Jewish neighbors, and in places that were you know, multi-communities who were living together, such as in Jaffa. And so things started to change with the formation of the World Zionist Movement by Theodor Herzl in 1897 in Basel, Switzerland. And he started a movement that, you know, was that sought the creation of a Jewish homeland. And it was in response to pogroms that had been going on in Europe, you know, in the 19th century. And there was a concerted effort by the leaders of this movement through the World Zionist Organization and the Jewish Agency to lobby the capitals of the world's major powers at the time, which was Britain and France, of course, because these were the two major colonial powers, and also the United States, because it was already, even before the Second World War, everyone could see that the United States was an emerging power. And you had David Ben-Gurion operating from Palestine. You had Chaim Weizmann in London, the Rothschilds in Paris, and Zionists in the United States, lobbying these governments to support the creation of a Jewish homeland. And of course, we know about the Balfour Declaration, where Lord Balfour was persuaded to issue a statement supporting where the British government would commit to supporting the creation of a Jewish homeland. Now, all this sort of comes into sharper focus with the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, and then the agreement in the secret agreement in 1916 between the British and the French to carve out the Middle East that is south of Turkey into areas of control. And there was mandates. You had a French mandate and a British mandate. And the French mandate was Lebanon and Syria. The British mandate was Palestine, the Jordan, and Iraq. And that was the Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916. And there was an effort by the Zionist movement to encourage Jewish migration into this British mandate, Palestine. And as the immigration accelerated, there were a number of Arab protests, or Palestinian protests. And the first major one was in 1929, and the big protest, resistance against the Jewish immigration, because it was taking over property. It was leading to a lot of abuses. There were terror attacks by Jewish militias. The first of these to be created was the Haganah in 1920. This was followed by the Irgun Tzvei Leumi in 1931, and then the Lehi in 1940, and the Palmach 1941. And these attacks were terrorizing Palestinians, and also led to the second great uprising, 1936 to 1939. So this was how the tensions were building, and the real immigration pressure did not really gain a lot of steam until the beginnings of the Holocaust, where Jews really needed a place to go. And the Jewish Agency and the World Zionist Organization were encouraging them to go to Palestine, and they would not support them or give any aid to them going to the US or going to other places. So this is how it began, and of course this lobbying at the world's capitals continued, for the partition of Palestine at the United Nations in 1947 November, and the United Nations this was the partition that gave 57% of the land to the Jewish state and 43% of the land to the Palestinian state. But the Israeli militias launched their attacks on 531 Palestinian villages and the city of Jaffa, which then had a population of about 30,000, and terrorized Palestinians out of these villages. 750,000 Palestinians were terrorized to leave their homes, which the Palestinians today call a Nakba, the catastrophe. And of course the state of Israel was created. The memory of those villages that were cleansed of Palestinians is being deliberately obscured by, of all things, the Keren Kayemet. Keren Kayemet is the Jewish National Fund. Jewish National Fund has a huge campaign that has been going on for decades to plant a tree for Israel. Plant a tree for Israel. So it sounds like a great ecological idea, but these forests, if you go to Jerusalem, between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, this is the area where a large number of these villages were cleansed. You'll see these forests, and these forests are there to cover over the locations of the Palestinian villages that were cleansed. But you can still go there and you can identify where those villages were. And because even though the buildings have been totally demolished, there's one clue. And it is the cactus. It is the cactus, because cactus is not native to this area. But the Palestinians used cactus to demarcate the boundaries of their plots. So this was the beginning of the cleansing. Now let's turn a little bit to Gaza. So Gaza was came under Egyptian control. The West Bank came under Jordanian control. The partition lines, which is the ceasefire lines, were moved substantially to the west, so that the amount of land that would be in these territories, that is to say Gaza and the West Bank, that would become the future occupied territories, would be much smaller than the original UN partition plan. And Gaza, let me go back a little bit. And so I want to talk a little bit about Gaza's history, and I'll come back to this. So there's a very nice article. In fact, there's a book called Why Gaza Matters, and it gives you a comprehensive history of Gaza. And because today we think of Gaza as being this wasteland, a wasteland where the refugees have been forced. Some of these are people who have been refugees in multiple migrations. And the fact is that Gaza, because it was on the Mediterranean, and because it was at the juncture between Asia and Africa, it was actually in a very strategic location, especially for trade. It was also a very contested area between empires. I mean, every major empire, the Persian Empire, the Roman Empire, the Crusades, everything came through here. So it was very contested. but it was also, you know, as the author of this book, Jean-Pierre Filiou, says that Gaza was the jewel in the crowns of these empires. And I'll just read a short passage here. Gaza was renowned for its fruitful climate, its congenial natives, and high quality of life. In 1659, one French traveler described it as a very cheerful and agreeable place. 2 centuries later, another, the French writer Pierre Loti, marveled at its vast fields of barley, all clothed in green. And it's not what we think of Gaza today, right? And indeed, it's in some ways it's an adverse place to live, but it's only an adverse place to live because there are so many people in Gaza. 2.3 million people now in an area which includes agricultural fields, in an area that is 2/3 the size of the city of San Jose. Okay, that's how small Gaza is. And it means that people are forced to live in places that are not otherwise habitable. So for example, the people who have been, when Israel was doing its assault on Gaza a few months ago, it specifically asked Palestinians who was asking for them to evacuate. It said, go to Al-Mawasi. Al-Mawasi is this coastal strip that is west of Khan Yunis. And it has the beach, and it's a sandy area, and nobody has lived there because it's not a very good place to live. And the groundwater is totally saline. So it's not a sustainable place to live, and because it's sandy, you can't grow anything. So there are many reasons why it's not really habitable. People are staying there. There are, I don't know how many 100,000 are actually, camped out there in Al-Mawasi right now. But, there are other parts of Gaza that are like Gaza City, like Khan Yunis. Khan Yunis is another historical city. In fact, that is the, that and Gaza City are historical cities that have been there for 4,000 years, right? So we're not talking about bombing some kind of a wasteland that happens to have 2.3 million people. We're talking about a place that has culture, that has history, that was a center of trade and commerce. And Gaza became radicalized because between 1948 and 1967, the Six-Day War, Gaza was a part of Egypt. And what happened in Egypt was 2 things. One was that Gamal Abdel Nasser, as president, came to power with the Free Officers Movement in 1952. Okay, and he became a leader of the non-aligned movement. So he was a somewhat radical leader at that time, relative to everything else that was going on. And it was, and there was another factor, which was the rise of the Muslim Brotherhood, which was created in the 1920s in Egypt. And it was flourishing in Egypt in Gamal Abdel Nasser's time. And it led to the birth of the ideas that led to the formation of Hamas. So there were, these radical ideas were bubbling in Egypt. I say, radical in quotes, but today we would look at these are ideas that were about anti-colonialism, about rising up for the peoples of the third world rising up and standing up to the great powers. And it is under these circumstances that Hamas, came into being in the 80s. And Hamas, I want you to understand, is that so Hamas is an Arabic acronym. Okay, its full name is Harkat al-Muqawama al-Islamiyya, which means the Islamic Resistance Movement. And so it was created because it viewed the Palestinian people as being under this oppression of being occupied, an occupied people, a people who had suffered through a catastrophe. And so to regard it just simply as a terrorist organization is totally obfuscating the reasons why it came into existence. So it engages in armed tactics that many of us would find would be very uncomfortable with. And we might even condemn some of the things that they do. But that should not erase why they're doing it. Why was there a Jewish resistance in the Warsaw Ghetto? Right? Because there's an oppression that is going on. It's not just going on, but it's getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And so somebody had to do something. And sometimes the most horrible acts are committed by those who either have unlimited power or those who are helpless. They don't have any power. They don't have any other way to act. And so this is sort of what I'm seeing in Israel, Palestine, is that Israel has unlimited power because it has unlimited backing. And then Hamas and the Palestinian resistance groups like PFLP find themselves with no options. And so they just strike out. So that's the context that I want you to understand it in. Now let's come to 1993. Let's do a fast forward to 1993. Why? Because I want to talk about the Oslo process. So the Oslo process was the United States brokered and Norway, brokered this process in the hopes of finding a solution, a long-term solution to the Israel-Palestine conflict that would lead to a two-state solution. And they knew that a solution could not be created overnight. And so they said, make this a process. So there would be continued negotiations, there would be step by step, there would be measures taken to stabilize the situation. So one of the concepts that came out of the Oslo process very immediately, you had the Gaza-Jericho agreement of 1994, for example. And that and other agreements created the zones within the occupied territories. So in the West Bank, you have the creation of the Area A, Area B, Area C. And Area A was areas that are under Palestinian Authority control. This is the wording, it's exclusive PA control. Area C is under exclusive Israeli, which means IDF control. And then Area B is joint control. So Area B, so Area A are the Palestinian cities like Ramallah, like Hebron, like Jericho. The Area C are the Palestinian villages, the rural areas. And Area B are the suburbs of the cities and the small towns. Okay. So all that did, you think, okay, So what that does is it means that Palestinians have some autonomy, at least in Area A. But the Palestinian Authority had no vision for how to, uplift the Palestinian people in those areas. It was so corrupt, and the corruption remains to this day. And for that reason, it has very little support. The support for Fatah and its control of the Palestinian Authority is so bad that people just don't care about it. And on the other hand, you have the Israelis controlling the vast majority of the territory, either through Area C or Area B, because effectively, when it's a question of joint authority between the PA and the IDF really controls it. And so, even today, what we're seeing, what we have seen in the past, ever since the right-wing government came into power in November of 2022, is that Israel has been, on a daily basis, doing raids into Area A, like Nablus, like Jenin, like Tukaram, like Qalqilia, and so there's no meaning to any kind of Palestinian autonomy, even in Area A. And the number of raids that have been that Israel has been conducting has been accelerating. So after October 7th, it has gone up maybe tenfold, the number of raids. And so that we have an average of 40 raids per day, military raids. We haven't seen anything like this since 2002. 2002 was the year when the IDF moved into the West Bank and took control in response to the Second Intifada. And that was the time when the Israelis laid siege to the Church of the Nativity, for example, in Bethlehem. So anyway, the Oslo process has not led anywhere. It has led to the partitioning of the occupied territories. It has led to, even though this was not its intent, but it has led to the increasing Israeli settlement of the West Bank, so that the number of settlers in the West Bank has gone from a few tens of thousands in 1993 to 500,000 now in what is formerly the West Bank. And this is not including East Jerusalem, right? So East Jerusalem adds another 250,000 settlers, if you think of that as occupied territory. And that was because Israel in the 1990s created something called the Jerusalem they annexed East Jerusalem and then created a joint authority called the Jerusalem Municipality, in which Jerusalem, East and West Jerusalem, were consolidated, and the wall was built further to the east, and Palestinian cities like Jebel al-Mukhabar were taken over, incorporated into the Jerusalem Municipality. They were formerly in the West Bank, right? Jebel al-Mukhabar. And so these settlers, these 250,000, quarter of a million Israeli settlers are living in these areas of East Jerusalem, and what were formerly parts of West Bank. So, in other words, the Oslo process led to a further and continuous degradation of the Palestinian condition in the West Bank. So now, if you go anywhere within the West Bank, you have to go through Israeli checkpoints. This is going from Palestinian areas to Palestinian areas. You have to go through Israeli checkpoints. And some of these checkpoints, of course, now it's because it's after October 7th and things are really, really difficult because some of these checkpoints are closed, so you can't go. Others are temporarily closed, but you don't know when they will open, so people may wait for hours and hours and hours to get through. And so it's an extremely, extremely difficult situation. And also so intimidating. Every time I go there, I myself feel very intimidated, even though I have a US passport, you know, and I think I'll get through, but it's so intimidating to see these watchtowers and these massive concrete walls and these armed soldiers. And these soldiers have you know, very few real instructions. So they're not very disciplined. There's not predictability of what an Israeli soldier will say to you when you come to a checkpoint, or if you're stopped by an Israeli soldier. And you know, and then you see, you know, nowadays Israeli soldiers, you know, filming themselves on video and making very nasty remarks about Palestinians, which tells you, you know, some of their attitudes towards the Palestinians. That first of all, they don't have any kind of proper training in international law, any kind of training in terms of treating people humanely, but they're very abusive. They raid homes and ransack the whole house, which is totally unnecessary, right? I mean, they may be in there just to terrorize. And this is happening not just in Gaza, it's happening in the West Bank. It's happening many, many times every day in the West Bank. So this is the sort of the situation. Okay, there are many things I can say, but I'm going to. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about international law. So the question of genocide has been raised, and you know, critics of Israel have not really raised this term genocide, except in previously, you know, we would say that Israel is exercising a slow genocide on Palestinians, in the sense that ever since Al-Nakba there has been a systematic ethnic cleansing, attempts to ethnically cleanse the area. We saw this in East Jerusalem, in Silwan, in various neighborhoods, Palestinian neighborhoods in East Jerusalem, where you have demolitions of houses, you have the Israeli military going in there and supporting Israeli settlers, just simply taking a house. I mean, I don't know how many videos there are of you see the Israeli settlers in East Jerusalem. I'm not talking about the West Bank. They're going in there in a neighborhood that is you know 98% Palestinian, and they invade a Palestinian's house. People are actually living there. They go in there with weapons, and they just start moving furniture. They just start throwing furniture out the window or out of the balcony, or just moving it out into the street. And then they move in, and the police say nothing. This is what's happening. And then of course there are the official government, you know, demolitions of Palestinian houses on the pretext that the permits, the owner doesn't have the permits, or they don't have the right title papers. So that's a long story about the title papers, because it depends on when the title papers for that property were obtained. And Israel didn't, for example, never recognize title papers that were granted to Palestinians under the British mandate. In some cases, they recognized title papers that were issued by Jordan during, you know, between 48 and 67. But anything else, they just disregard and say that, okay, this is a grounds for demolishing the house. And then the other ground for demolishing the house is if someone in that household is alleged to have committed some sort of anti-Israeli act, such as throwing a stone at an Israeli soldier, then that whole house will be demolished. Okay, so I want to start with let's go back to the definition of genocide, because the term genocide is thrown around a lot, and it's not just a mass killing. Let's be very clear about it. The person, Raphael Lemkin, who coined the term genocide in 1948, a Jewish historian, and his definition of genocide was that it doesn't even have to be a mass killing. It has to be an intentional cleansing of an identity, of a people, of a language, of some aspect of a group of people. And of course it's reinforced if there are a lot of people who are being killed. And so the South Africa has made this application to the International Court of Justice, alleging that Israel has committed genocide and that the International Court of Justice should take action, should issue a ruling against Israel for this. So the question of genocide really comes to the fore, and there's a lot of evidence of this. But again, it's still evidence. The difference between evidence and a court of law coming to a conviction, there's still a difference between that, right? But let us start with those statements that Israeli officials have given, and I'm sure you've heard about some of these. So first, let's start with Benjamin Netanyahu. So he says on October 7th, so right after the attack, he says, "We will turn Gaza into a deserted island. To the citizens of Gaza, I say, you must leave now. We will target each and every corner of the strip." He goes on to say, "We will turn Gaza into an island of ruins." Now, what does that mean? He's talking about cleansing the Gaza Strip. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, October 9th, says, "I have ordered a complete siege on the Gaza Strip. There will be no electricity, no food, no fuel. Everything is closed. We are fighting human animals, and we are acting accordingly." Yitzhak Herzog, the President of Israel, October 11th, "It is an entire nation who are responsible. This rhetoric about civilians supposedly not being involved is absolutely untrue, and we will fight until we break their backs." Daniel Hagari, the IDF spokesperson, October 10th, "We are dropping hundreds of tons of bombs on Gaza. The focus is on destruction, not accuracy." Anyway, I can go on and on. I have quotes from Bezalel Smotrich, of course, not surprising. Here's something interesting from Itamar Ben-Gvir, Minister of the Cabinet. "The emigration of hundreds of thousands from Gaza will allow residents of the border area, that means Israeli residents, to return to their homes and live in security, and also to protect the IDF soldiers." So in other words, there's this emerging concept in Israel that was solidified by this recent settler conference, huge settler conference, that many of the cabinet ministers and members of Knesset attended, is the notion that Gaza needs to be resettled, because having Israeli settlers in Gaza is a way to create an environment that is more protective of Israeli soldiers. It's an interesting concept. Usually the Israeli soldiers go and protect the settlers. And here there's the concept that the Israeli settlers will create an environment that is safe for the soldiers to occupy. Anyway, I can go on. So you see the intent of the leadership. Now, there is a policy paper written by the Israeli Ministry of Intelligence, dated 13th October 2023. So it was leaked. And the policy paper says that the best option, so the question is, what are the options for Israel to handle Gaza when the war is over? And so one thing that it tells you something about attitudes is they use the term, well, of course, overthrow Hamas's rule, we know that. Evacuation of the population outside of the combat zone. So that means transferring the population, which is against international law, to move them out of the place where they live. And it calls for international aid to reach the area. And it also says ideological change. You have to change the ideology of Gaza, and a process that they call denazification. So it's as if the Palestinians in Gaza are Nazis. And when they look at the actual strategy for the evacuation, it is about option C. So they evaluate three options, which two of them are about installing some kind of a government in Gaza. One is the Palestinian Authority, which they consider to be the least acceptable. The second is a new Palestinian government, which they consider to be problematic. And they favor, the Ministry of Intelligence favors option C, the evacuation of the civilian population from Gaza to Sinai. This is ethnic cleansing. This is genocide. And then they also say that they use this argument that the settlers have been using, that the only basis for having a military presence is to bring in settlements. So you need settlements to create an environment where the occupation can be effective. Okay. Next, I want to talk about before I get there. This is the Fourth Geneva Convention. This is the Fourth Geneva Convention, 1949. And the first three Geneva Conventions are about the laws of war. How combatants treat other combatants, how you treat prisoners of war, and so forth. And they came about because of the formation of the United Nations and because of the experience of the Second World War. The Fourth Geneva Convention is about the treatment of civilians under conditions of war. So what are the rules for handling civilians under these conditions? So I won't go through it here, but you see all these colored tabs. So these colored tabs are sections of the Fourth Geneva Convention that I have marked for myself as potential Israeli violations of the Fourth Geneva Convention. It's not one violation, it's many, many different violations. I don't have time to go into it. So this brings me to the ICJ. So a lot of people, there's been a lot of back and forth between different parties, saying that expressing either happiness or disappointment with the ICJ decision that was brought by South Africa. A lot of people, particularly on the Palestinian side, that, well, they were disappointed they didn't call for a ceasefire. And one has to understand how courts work and how the law works. Okay, it's not so simple as it is, because a ceasefire, it's easy to do it at a political level. It's easy to say that at a political level. It's much harder to say that at a legal level, right? So the question is, why did South Africa take the approach that it did and call for provisional findings? And that's because of Article 41. This is the statute of the International Court of Justice. So Article 41 says that the court shall have the power to indicate, if it considers the circumstances so require, any provisional measures which ought to be taken to preserve the respective rights of either party. So that is the first phase of what South Africa has asked for, the phase that can be done within a short period of time, because they wanted a statement out of the ICJ within a short period of time. They didn't want a statement 3-4 years from now, when the conflict might be over and who knows how many people would die. And to actually, at a judicial level, to convict a party of genocide requires a very high, standard of proof that would take years. Okay, so what the ICJ did is, well, first of all, let's look at. I have here the application by South Africa to the ICJ to initiate the case. What did they ask for? Well, first of all, most of this is evidence. So what did they ask for? Among the things that they asked for was the state of Israel shall immediately suspend its military operations in and against Gaza. And there are a few other things. So that South Africa itself did not use the term ceasefire. And so this is the ICJ's actual order, right? Which is their findings, their preliminary findings. And it says the court considers that with regard to the situation described above, Israel must, in accordance with the obligation under the Genocide Convention, in relation to Palestinians in Gaza, take all measures within its power to prevent the commission of all acts within the scope of Article 2 of this convention, in particular the killing of members of the group, causing serious bodily harm, mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting group conditions of life calculated to bring about physical destruction, and in part, and so on. So the ICJ's findings at this point are totally in line with what the South African application was asking for. No more, no less. And so I'm happy that the ICJ has taken this position, and it is totally, consistent with what they can do under the law and under the provisions of the application. I wanted to talk a little bit about Hamas because Hamas is as I mentioned, is the Islamic resistance movement, and it is very, very strongly demonized. I don't agree with a lot of things they do. For one thing, I don't agree with, them being an Islamist movement. I'm not an Islamist. I'm not a religious fanatic, and so there are a lot of things that I don't accept. But I wanted to take a moment to remember that Hamas, the charter of Hamas was created in 1987. The charter that was written in 1987 was amended in 2017 to include an explicit, recognition of Israel as a state that has a right to exist. And if you ask any Hamas leaders the question, what solution do you foresee? What long-term solution do you see for Israel-Palestine conflict? They'll say the two-state solution. So just like Fatah, Hamas believes in a two-state solution. And you cannot believe in a two-state solution and be thinking about pushing Israelis into the sea. The allegation that Hamas is committed to the destruction of Israel and the obliteration of all Israelis comes from one sentence in the Hamas covenant. And that statement in the covenant is not actually a statement of policy. It's simply a quotation from their founder, Hassan al-Banna. And there was one translation of it that was done at Yale University many years back. And that one translation has been replicated over and over again. And so everyone who reads it in English reads it from that one translation from Yale University, which is that Hamas believes in obliterating Israel. But when I look at the Arabic in that quotation from Hassan al-Banna, it translates more properly as Israel will continue in place until Islam will invalidate it as it has repealed others before it. So the way I interpret it, even though it's just a quote, it's not a policy statement, is that Israel as an exclusively Jewish state is invalid. And it either has to accept the non-Jewish residents of Israel, citizens of Israel, to be equal citizens, or we have to go to a two-state solution. That's what it's saying. That's the implication. What we're coming to is that there's a lot of context to this situation. We cannot take what has happened in the past 4 months out of context. We have to understand the historical background. We have to understand what all is going on. We have to be able to separate the facts from the lies, from the disinformation. There's been a lot of deliberate disinformation. And then once the disinformation goes out, for example, the notion that Hamas raped women on October 7th, that Hamas put babies in ovens. This was a very quick operation to go in and pull out. And brutal as it was not about specifically doing atrocities. And every one of these kinds of accusations have been fact-checked, and no evidence has been found to substantiate them. And yet these persist, so particularly among the supporters of Israelis who are living in this country. It's surprising how many Israelis are living here. They continue to put out these accusations that Hamas raped and beheaded babies and did all of these things, even though they had no time to do that. And after the fact checking, there's no way of pulling that misinformation back. And what we have to do is we have to look forward to a ceasefire, ending this conflict. We have to change U.S. policy from this unconditional support for Israel, because this is emboldened. It's like, what I think of this as is like you have a a boy or a young man who is engaging in criminal activities, and if you give him, instead of punishing him or pulling him back or educating him, you just simply say, whatever you do, okay, I'll give you some money for it. I'll give you a gun. You know, you can do whatever you want. And there's never a serious criticism. I mean, every time, you know, Biden, for example, says that we are pressuring, or Blinken says that we are pressuring the Israelis to pull back on their attacks on civilians. And then there's no substance behind it. And yet the U.S. has the power to stop this. So there is an Israeli general who said that all the weapons we have, okay, Israel has some substantial arms manufacturers. The largest is the IDI, the Israel Defense Industries. The second one is Elbit, and so, but all the rest of its arms, in terms of what it imports, come from the United States. So the general said that all of our imported arms are U.S. origin. And so if the U.S. said, we're going to cut off arms sales, we're going to cut off arms shipments to Israel. So this Israeli general says, we wouldn't be able to continue this. We'd have to stop almost immediately because we would run out. So the U.S. has that power to stop this. And it's unfortunate that we're at this situation because the U.S. has given this blank check to Israel for all these decades. I'll leave the rest for the Q&A. Thank you.
Our government is going into Yemen, Syria, and it looks to me the war is expanding. Is there any way to bring it back?
Yes, excellent question. The U.S. is engaging in these attacks, and you know, the U.S. has often said some words about proportionality. That if there is an attack, then the response should be proportionate. And yet this is not proportionate. So three U.S. servicemen were killed in Jordan about a week ago, and the raids that the U.S. has launched in Iraq and Syria. The U.S. has not given a casualty count, but Iraq and Syria have reported 60 deaths. That was the latest figure that I had heard. So, the question is 60 even proportionate to 3? Well, but more importantly, it's a question of does this escalation, pose fundamental risks to stability and peace in the region? And absolutely it does. The other thing I want to say is that these are the attacks on U.S. bases have been launched by what are alleged to be, and I'm sure some of them are, Iran-supported groups. Now, there's a term that is used, these are Iranian proxies. And I want to make very clear that most of them, particularly the ones that are the actors that are in Syria, particularly Hezbollah in Lebanon, certainly Hamas in Gaza, even Yemen, okay, that these are not proxies in the sense that these are not military actors that are taking orders from Iran. They have their own agendas, they have their own perspectives, for example, for Hamas, it's about responding, about defending the people in Gaza, or at least defending their right to exist, and challenging, resisting an oppression, an occupation. And so there are times when these groups have differed from the Iranian perspective, and so it's a mistake to think of them as proxies. That if you were to neutralize Iran, that these problems would go away. They won't go away, because there are fundamental issues in Gaza, there are fundamental issues in Lebanon that won't go away, even if there were a regime change in Iran. But the risk is not just with a conflict between the United States and Iran. It's about inflaming the whole region. It's about, there are protests all over the region. People are really, really frustrated. There are mass protests. I mean, even in countries that are so authoritarian that protests have been prohibited. Okay, so for example, in Egypt, ever since Sisi came to power in 2013, protests of almost any kind have been very strictly prohibited, and thousands and thousands of people have been jailed. But after October 7th, there were large. Of course, it's also because the government, sort of allowed them, because they don't pose a threat to Assisi's power. But it's something that we haven't seen since 2013. Is large protests in Egypt. But the point is that this is inflaming, passions throughout the Middle East. The U.S. actions. First the U.S. support for Israel in its current assault, and then the U.S. counterattacks on other countries. And we also see the response in Iraq, that the government is becoming increasingly frustrated with the U.S. presence there. And so it's not, I wouldn't be surprised if very soon the Iraqi government will ask the remaining U.S. troops to leave.
You say the Hamas action was a response to the Israeli transactions. Do you feel that the Hamas action was justified under those circumstances?
So I don't support acts of violence in which civilians are targeted. So we have to. The answer to this is that what Hamas did was I would say about two-thirds of it ended up being civilian casualties, and 1/3 of it was targeted against Israeli police in the kibbutzes and the towns that were attacked, and so there was, to the extent that they could, in a very, very short window of time, that they were also going after military targets, and then certainly the guards at the border crossings, and but there were I mean, going into the music festival, I think is totally we should condemn that. I don't think that we gain anything from doing that. So I don't agree with the tactics. And the other thing is this, that we don't hear very much about it, but there have been within Israel there have been analyses of the people who were killed on October 7th on the Israeli side, that a substantial number of them, maybe up to 1/3, were actually killed by the Israeli security forces, their counterattack, their response to the Hamas incursion, is that there was so much force from the air and from the ground. A lot of the people who were killed on that day were actually killed by Israeli forces in their in their response to it. But in any case, yeah, so there's a lot of things that happen on both sides on October 7th that I would find extremely problematic and I would condemn.
Let's say that the U.S. was able to negotiate a ceasefire, and that both Hamas, people in Gaza, the Israelis, for a period of time, actually abided by the ceasefire. What would you see possibly happening next in that situation? Is there any hope that some solution could come out of that in the event there was actually a ceasefire?
Yes, so if we can achieve a ceasefire and that the ceasefire is stable, then there is a process, of course, of well, the most immediate thing is first of all to provide unlimited humanitarian relief, to begin the reconstruction of Gaza, finding housing for all these people, and doing all of these sort of the immediate relief that is needed. Beyond that, it's a question of negotiations to find a long-term, political solution. Is how will Gaza be governed? How will the West Bank be governed? How will we find a single solution for Gaza as well as the West Bank? Because one thing that the world community and the Palestinians in particular do not want is to have a separate solution for the two areas, because they're both part of Palestine. And we want a two-state solution, not a three-state solution. The other option, of course, is the one-state solution, right? And there is, because of all the settlement activity that has gone on, so that now we have 750,000 Israeli settlers living on what was Palestinian land, we can say Palestinian land that was east of the Green Line being the ceasefire line of 1948, 49. And that is a factor that is a real monkey wrench in the two-state solution. Is that, are you going to pull those settlers back? Which means really evicting a lot of them, because you got two kinds of settlers, right? So you've got economic settlers who go to the settlements because the housing is cheaper, it's subsidized in the settlements. And then the ideological settlers, who are the ones who want to take over Judea and Samaria. Okay, they are there because they want the whole Palestine, the whole Israel. And they are going to fight to stay. The other way is you carve out these areas and have an exchange. That there's been talk about an exchange of land. So that means that if you have, some of these areas are quite large. So for example, Ma'ale Adumim, which is just east of Jerusalem, it was, well, as of some years ago, it was already had 50,000 residents, and there are settlements now in between there and Jerusalem, so there will be created. There is in the process of being created a continuous area that will have hundreds of thousands of people, particularly when an area called E1, when E1 is fully developed. But that is my point is that is the settlement trajectory. Is the E1 will be developed as an Israeli settlement area. And first of all, you have to have negotiations to stop that process, and then figure out, okay, if it's by exchanges, what are we exchanging these areas for? Israel has never even thought about, well, if we keep Ma'ale Adumim, what do we give up in exchange for it? And they may say, well, we'll give up a piece of the Negev. You know? So, I don't know, but that's all open to negotiation, right? And so there has to be a negotiating process. It's going to be very difficult to even come to a two-state solution, but that's what the world is committed to. That's what the United Nations is committed to, at least on paper, or in words. In terms of the one-state solution, which is more or less the trajectory that we have right now, is that Israel effectively controls the whole area. West Bank, Gaza, Israel proper. And so a one-state solution means transitioning to a system of governance that provides equal rights, equal opportunity, equal recognition to Jews and non-Jews alike. And when I say non-Jews, I'm talking about Muslims, Christians, Druze, and Bedouins. And the state of Israel, unfortunately, was not founded on those kinds of principles, and it would severely erode, or it is contrary to the Zionist concept of a Jewish homeland, where Jews control, and this is a land for Jews. It's like saying this is a Jewish state. It's not a secular state, or it's not a multinational state. So the other people are there as quote unquote guests at best. So anyway, but this is what has to happen. For our part, as Americans, we have to keep pushing our government to stop giving a blank check to Israel and to promote a solution, whether it is two-state or one-state, that is equitable for all peoples within those borders. Okay? This is the key. And if we do that goes a long way, because it puts Israel under pressure. It puts the Palestinians under pressure to find a solution, to make the ceasefire permanent. And Palestinians will do that if they see that there is a movement towards a viable solution. Another thing about the two-state solution. Israel envisions a Palestinian state. I mean, previous leaders, even Netanyahu, before the current government, would say that yes, we envision a two-state solution, but Israel has to be able to secure its borders. So what has never been talked about is the right of Palestinians and the Palestinian state to defend itself. Right? And so there has to be a recognition that if you have a two-state solution, Israel has its military, Palestine needs to have its military. And there needs to be some kind of demilitarization, some kind of movement towards demilitarizing the Israeli state. Because otherwise it has this total monopoly over military power. And if we have a peaceful situation, why does Israel need nuclear weapons? Why do we? Actually, it's a very discriminatory policy. So our nuclear weapon secrets are very, cherished and well kept. We have the most advanced nuclear weapons in the world. The only dual citizens who can get a security clearance to work in Los Alamos or to work in any of the U.S. nuclear facilities, Lawrence Livermore, are Israelis. There are Israeli dual nationals who are working in these labs, who have access to all of those nuclear secrets. The reason that Israel never has needed to test a nuclear weapon is because it has access to all the test results from the U.S. nuclear tests. Okay. So anyway, so the U.S. has to have a more equitable approach in this, and it's key to the success of a post-ceasefire process.
Well, the comments you've made about negotiation, it seems to me as long as this right-wing government is in power, that there will be none of that. So my question, I have several questions. My first question is, do you envision a situation where this right-wing government goes out of power? It sort of, in some ways, reminds me of when Trump took over in this country. Is there a chance that those people, and there are many Israelis who do not support this right-wing government, do you see any chance that this will turn around? My second question is historic. It strikes me that the second catastrophe was when Yasser Arafat turned down the PLO, the PLO, when he was running the PLO and there were negotiations, and the Israelis offered a two-state solution, which may or may not have been as equitable as it could have been, but it was a viable thing. And it was turned down by Arafat way back when. It seems like at that time, Israel had a much different attitude, at least the government of Israel. And I wonder, has everything flowed in the right-wing direction since that time? The other thing I wanted to say is I believe that the citizens, there are 10% Arab citizens in Israel. Arabs are citizens. And so that this going towards a monolithic Jewish state is again another right-wing situation.
Well, okay, so first of all, the Arab population in Israel proper is about 20%. The representation in the Knesset is more like 10%. It's not a monolithic state, but the Israelis, I'm talking about Jewish Israelis, as well as Arab Israelis, that is to say the Palestinian citizens of Israel who live within Israel proper, have Israeli ID cards, have accepted this arrangement. I mean, it's reluctant. I mean, the Arabs are still distrustful. But if you look at the poll, so there's a recent study that was done by some scholars where they surveyed Israeli public opinion, both before and after the October 7th. And they found that about 2/3 of Jewish Israelis have views of a future solution that is at least compatible. It is not irreconcilable with the two-state solution. So they see some kind of accommodation. Well, the Arabs, they have some measure of trust in Arab participation in Israeli politics, in Israeli life, there's a similar rate among the Israeli Arabs in their acceptance, maybe reluctant acceptance of the system, even though they're second-class citizens, but their willingness to abide by that, live in that situation because they don't have any other choice. So that means that if you go on the basis of Israeli public opinion, looking at principles, looking at least broad solutions and outlooks, there's hope. It's not out of the question. If you look at it in terms of the way that things play out politically between these political parties, it looks really gloomy. And so what I'm saying by this is that the process of negotiations, of dialogue, it's very important how this proceeds, how it's structured, how it proceeds, how it moves forward step by step. And there are a lot of pitfalls, I know. But I have to be an optimist because we have to find a solution to it. And this public opinion data, reinforces that hope. Okay, now my brain has only a limited, so I can't remember your first two questions.
What do you foresee in terms of this extreme right-wing government being put out of power?
So the current government, okay, the current government is specifically with Netanyahu as the prime minister, is very unpopular. But it's unpopular for a number of different reasons. So there are different segments of the population that oppose him. Obviously, because of the Gaza war, the Arab population is thoroughly disgruntled with him. The families of the Israeli hostages are displeased because they have actually called for, at least the majority of them have actually called for a ceasefire as a way of getting the remaining hostages released, because that's the only way they see it. There's a large segment of the public that sees, there were corruption proceedings, and there were other things that were happening before November of 2022 that Netanyahu would have faced, and he knows that he's going to have to face it sometime or other, which is why he's prolonging this war. And this commentary is not coming from me. This is coming from the Israeli media. Okay, they're saying that Netanyahu is prolonging things because otherwise he will be out of power. So there are a lot of those, and then also the various coalition partners are not happy. You have Benny Gantz, of course, in the opposition, who believes in another way is possible, and the polls show that Benny Gantz has more public support than Netanyahu. So I think that the days of this government are numbered. But the question is what happens after that, right? And that gets into what I was talking about earlier, that Israeli public opinion still gives me some hope, even though the overall trend for the past 2 decades has been very negative. And the third question, did you want? I don't remember the middle question.
We talked about I mentioned the historic shift from a time when Israel was ready to sign documents and really move towards a solution. Rabin's assassination, all of the things that shifted the country away from that. It seems at that time, as I remember it, the PLO was holding out for more than it would ever get, and so.
So there are, we can look back in retrospect and criticize both sides for holding up the process and preventing it from going forward. And of course, Rabin was from the Labour Party, so he was the center left, right? And so that's a big contrast from what we see now. And there are missed opportunities, and there are huge missed opportunities on the part of the U.S. right for allowing this to go on for so long and for it to get worse and worse for so long. A lot of missed opportunity.
My question is about the other Arab states in the area besides Qatar. And it seems to me that's such a minute piece of the Arab world, and maybe it's the spokesperson or the link to the rest of the world, but don't you think that the rest of the Arab world needs to be part of this in order to kind of find a balance, in order to stabilize that area?
So the question is, what role do the other countries have. There have been backdoor negotiations that have been going on, not just with through Qatar and Egypt. The other countries have also played some role, or have attempted to play some role, and none of them have been belligerents. So it's except maybe Yemen, and I'm not sure what the other countries can do. I mean, some of them are for example, contributing funds to for example, the shortfall that UNRWA would have suffered, with the U.S., Britain, Germany, Canada cutting their contributions to UNRWA. So some of these Gulf states have chipped in amounts there. So basically, I think it's it's up to the major players, and it's really Israel, the United States, and the Western European powers. The other Arab countries have to me, have been played minor roles here, and they don't have a lot of leverage with the exception perhaps of Egypt. They don't have a lot of leverage to move the process forward, but they haven't done anything to obstruct it.
Can I ask you to focus just a little bit on Saudi Arabia, because it seems to me within the month ahead of the October 7th event, there was news coverage of a three-way agreement, or at least Israel, United States, and Saudi Arabia, working on some kind of arrangement that would recognize each other's sovereignty and right to exist and various things like that. And it seems to me that would have been a great breakthrough opportunity for the larger region to find some elements of a peace accord.
Well, the Saudis are still committed to that. The Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has said that we are still committed to that, and the process of establishing diplomatic relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel is still there. They have not dropped it. It's just suspended because of the current conflict. So I'm not sure, how much will be gained out of it. But the point is, it's not a dead issue. And it also follows on the heels of other agreements like Bahrain, to establish diplomatic relations with Israel. But just simply the normalization of relations alone is not the key issue. That's not the key to solving the conflict. But it just means that everybody, if there are diplomatic relations, the different parties will tone down their rhetoric. They will attempt to, at least there will be channels of communication that will be open. Diplomatic channels will be there, so that there can be discussions, there can be negotiations, and so the opportunities to formulate a solution will be enhanced. So,
Thank you very much for sharing your knowledge. I have a small question. What do you think of this China and Russia, as to China having the PRC, and Russia play the roles in this kind of thing in the future? Thank you.
Sorry,
Could you repeat
the question is what?
Yeah, my question is, what's the PRC and Russia? We talk about our own view. Like, I think I agree with you that our country gives too much degree of freedom to Israel, like a blank check, as you mentioned. My view is, I ask you as experts, what's the PRC and Russia play the game I mean, who's really support Hamas? Who really support the PLO? But the entire world, the bigger picture changes, and the balance will be different. That's why I ask you.
Yes. So the positions of other countries of the world, you know, particularly the large countries like the BRICS, for example, are very different from the U.S. and Western European position. And so I believe that China and Russia, that they would provide a diversity of perspectives that would bring balance to negotiate if they were to be brought into the negotiating process for a solution to the Israel-Palestine conflict. They don't have any, I think, you know, vested interests in blindly supporting one side or the other. And China's interests are more about solving things diplomatically and about economic development for mutual benefit. Russia has its own interest, its own interest right now because it's concerned about its own you know, integrity and it's under feeling of being surrounded and closed in. But with respect to the Israel-Palestine conflict, I mean, of course, there is always, you know, particularly as the Soviet Union, it was you know, much more supportive of Palestine and the right of the Palestinians to have their own country. I mean, Russia was, you know, also one of the first countries to recognize the state of Israel when it declared independence in 1948 and to vote for the UN partition plan. So anyway, I think that they would be, as major powers, which therefore have some degree of leverage, not as much leverage as the U.S., some degree of leverage in the area, that they could play a positive role, a balancing role.
Well, with the resurgence of peace movements around the world and the anti-genocide, anti-Zionist as opposed to Israel, and not anti-Jewish, but anti-expansionist Israel genocide protests going on all around the world, what gives you hope for this situation? I mean, young people and elders, people all over the world are protesting. Perhaps not in the EU countries per se, many of them are bought into the Zionist project, as it were, but we must have some hope. Now let me just say, I am not a part of this peace organization, but there is a candidate who is running against Leon Panetta, who's a major recipient of Israel lobby money. And this candidate is named Sean Doherty, and I will be outside, unattached to this organization, giving out some cards of his, if you like. But I really want to know from you, Dr. Lin, what is your hope?
So, good question. So if the, you know, so there have been previous conflicts, Israel-Palestine, that have resulted in anti-Zionist protests in this country, and they have never been very big. They've never been very big because, well, first of all, most of these have happened during the tenures of democratic presidents, when protest tends to be smaller. But also, you know, Palestine has not been perceived, or Israel-Palestine has not been perceived as an American war, because U.S. soldiers are not there. U.S. weapons that are there are not operated by U.S. soldiers. And so if you remember, you know, when the first Iraq war started, there were, in San Francisco, I remember there were so many people on Market Street, from the Embarcadero to the Civic Center, that you couldn't walk because it was packed all the way, from one you know, shops on one side to the other side of the street. So it was at least 250,000 people. And then again in the beginning of the Iraq War, not so much the Afghanistan War, but certainly much more so in the Iraq War because of the false pretenses. And again we had 200,000, upwards of 200,000 people out in the protesting in the streets. Never had that for Palestine protests. And to see 30,000 in San Francisco, to see 400,000 in New York City and Washington D.C. is remarkable. So it is only in this round that we have seen such an outpouring of protest. It doesn't equal the anti-war protests of the past, but it's much bigger than it has ever been. And that's because of the televised wars, which began with the Vietnam War. And of course Ukraine was a totally different situation because the Ukraine War was a war that the West saw through the eyes of the victims, the eyes of the people who were at least initially under attack. It was through Ukrainian eyes. And so there was no need, of course, to protest that because the U.S. was already a big supporter of Ukraine, even though I have issues with how that started, right? So the fact that we have these protests now is because the mainstream U.S. media don't have direct access into Gaza because Israel does not let them in. And also U.S. major news companies are reluctant to send their reporters into war zones unless they are embedded in some military. Okay? So the only mainstream media that we are getting out of Gaza is that now that Israel has ground troops, it has brought NBC into the tunnels under Khan Yunis, right? So they're embedded in the IDF, and so we haven't seen the other side. But the point is that because of the social media, because media like Al-Manar, like Al Jazeera, that do cover what's going on in Gaza because they have reporters on the ground permanently, we are getting all kinds of images. We're getting tons of images of what's actually happening there. And so the world's awareness of what's going on is much enhanced, and the war crimes are so clear and so decisive that we cannot ignore it. And so therefore we have these protests, even in the West European countries, so even though Germany and France Germany still, to some extent, bans pro-Palestinian protests because of its guilt complex, over the Holocaust. But protests are happening there. These are large protests with tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands in London. And so that is hope, because not because I'm hopeful because of the protests themselves, but because of the awareness that they have created around the world, around the West. The East has always, the global South has always been aware of it. And the fact that now, for example, the Democratic Party is having to confront the issue that Biden is losing popularity because he's being seen as the genocide president, right? So this I see as the beginning of a process that will change U.S. policy. I don't know by how much, I don't know how long it will take, but I know it's happening.
Do you believe that Hamas, based upon its conduct, should serve in some form of future Palestinian government, or should they not exist anymore?
So I believe that Hamas is a, well, Hamas is a political party among the Palestinian people. And it exists not just in Gaza, it also exists in the West Bank. So Hamas is in power in Gaza principally because of the elections of 2006, January 2006, the only elections that were held involving all of the Palestinian people who were living in the occupied territories. And in those elections, Hamas won a majority of the seats in the Palestinian National Council in Gaza and in the West Bank. And so, by any logic, Hamas should have taken the reins of government in both Gaza and the West Bank. And so what happened in Gaza was that the Fatah, which was the other major party that lost, contested Hamas. After the election, they started fights, and then Hamas said, "Okay, enough of this. We're just simply going to take control." But they were elected to control, so that was their legitimate. If you believe in democracy, they should have taken control of the government in Gaza. The fact that Fatah today controls the West Bank, how did that happen if they were not elected, if they didn't win a majority of the seats? Mm-hmm. So what happened in the West Bank was that after January, Israel systematically went around and arrested all of the Hamas elected members of parliament or members of the Palestinian National Council that they could get their hands on. So these people could not take their seats in the PNC, the Palestinian National Council. And so, by default, Fatah took control of in Ramallah. But it's actually illegitimate, right, in terms of the democratic election result. So Hamas has a legitimate role. It has a political role. It's a social organization that just like the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, provides social services, provides charity on a huge scale in Gaza. So it has a role in society. In terms of what we tend to think of, based upon the news reporting we sent, Israel is after Hamas fighters. The only thing we hear about are Hamas fighters, without thinking that the hospitals that are not under specialized NGO control. So for example, you have the Indonesian hospital, you have the EU hospital, the European hospital in Rafah. These hospitals are primarily funded by foreign agencies, but the rest of them are under the Ministry of Health of Gaza, which is Hamas. So about 20% of Hamas is the fighters, the Al-Qassam brigades. The rest of it is people running the infrastructure of government, paving the roads, running the government hospitals, So Hamas is more than just a militia. That's what we have to remember. And if there is a viable path forward towards peace, Hamas, I guarantee you, based upon my discussions with Hamas leaders, is that they will abide by that. They will be part of that process. But if it gets derailed and there are attacks, settler attacks and the violence in the West Bank gets worse, then there's going to be resistance. It's that simple. So yes, I believe Hamas has to be a part of that process. And the notion that Israel says that, well, we will continue this military operation until Hamas is eliminated. That's like saying, that's like China coming to the US and saying, we need to eliminate the Democratic Party. You can't eliminate it. You can't eliminate it. I don't agree with it, but it's part of American political culture.
Given the fact that Israel has nuclear weapons and is nuclear armed, and they are not a part of any nuclear treaty, shouldn't they be considered a rogue state and dealt with accordingly?
What we see here is a very dramatically differential treatment between Israel and other countries that have acquired nuclear weapons after 1945, right? Or after the founding of the United Nations. And so the UN Security Council consists of the P5 countries, which are all nuclear powers when the United Nations was created. And the countries that have acquired nuclear weapons since then are India, Pakistan, North Korea, and Israel. And when India acquired a nuclear weapon or exploded its first nuclear device in 1971, the US slapped sanctions on India. When Pakistan did that in 1998, it slapped sanctions and punitive measures on Pakistan. When North Korea did that, the U.S., of course, fully sanctioned, and the whole world fully sanctioned North Korea. When Israel did, acquired a nuclear weapon, first of all, it did not announce it, but the world knew about it, and nothing was done. And instead, their scientists have access to Los Alamos and Lawrence Livermore. So, and the U.S. on top of that gives $3.8 billion of military aid per year to Israel. So Israel has been a very, very special case. And yes, I believe that Israel should be subject to the if there is going to be an IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency. If the IAEA is going to inspect North Korea and is going to inspect Iran, why doesn't it inspect Israel? Why isn't there any kind of demand to ensure accountability and to ensure that Israel's nuclear weapons do not get used for an offense? And even though Israel has threatened, Israel has openly threatened that it might use a nuclear weapon if it needed to. And some of these leaders in the current cabinet they've not used the term nuclear weapon, but they said whatever is within our power, we may use it if we need to, particularly if you want to just obliterate Gaza. That they might use. The reason they won't use it, I think, in Gaza is because the nuclear fallout will affect Israel. It's just too close. But there have been implications that it might use the nuclear weapons against Iran, and I think that threat is still very real until we hold Israel accountable and say, we need an agreement that you will not use nuclear weapons as a first strike. So yes, absolutely, Israel has enjoyed this impunity for too long.
Another question? I think that's it.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the questions.
Thank you.